no one likes to be called stupid. So if you're trying to persuade somebody or change somebody's mind or present information to them, and you start with the premise that you're an idiot, no one's paying attention to you after that. And the truth is, most people are not. A lot of reasons people believe disinformation. And yes, I am absolutely guilty.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm going to take us on a journey to seek the truth amidst the sea of fake news and disinformation with a person who has published a book on the topic. Hopefully we can get a lifeline to find out how to separate the wheat from the crap. If you like what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app. I'd love to see you on my Facebook group, The Rational View. Come chat with me and give me your feedback on this episode. Thanks for listening. Infodemiologist Dr. Pauline W. Hoffmann is an associate professor in the Jandoli School of Communication and a New York State Senior Public Health Fellow with the Cattaraugus County Health Department, working on strategic and communication planning and implementation. She has a BSc in biology and an MA and PhD in communication. She is also an entrepreneur with 2 LLCs to her name, Wild Mountain Organics and Data Doyen. She has a LinkedIn newsletter titled WTF, What the Facts, which delves into all things infodemic. She most recently published her first book, Fake News, Witch Hunts, and Conspiracy Theories, an infodemiologist's guide to the truth. Her research and teaching focus on infodemics, conflict management, conflict resolution, and corporate and health communication and strategy. Prior to going into academia, Dr. Hoffmann worked in creative services for Catholic Health. She also served as the deans of the Jandoli School of Communication and Graduate Studies. She was a Richard P. Nathan Public Policy Fellow, having written a policy blog on disinformation relating to lead poisoning as it impacts public health. Personally, Dr. Hoffmann lives on a farm in the southern tier of New York with 2 dogs, 6 chickens, a duck, and 1 hive of bees. She is also a master scuba diver and regularly dives with sharks. Dr. Hoffmann, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Wow, you have a lot of hats. You run a small hobby farm, teach, you're an entrepreneur, and you write books. You recently published your first book, Fake News, Witch Hunts, and Conspiracy Theories, an infodemiologist's guide to the truth. What drives you to do all of that?
It's so funny when my bio is read, I always think, how do I have the time? And people ask me that. I don't know. I guess I just have really great time management skills. But honestly, I'm driven to teach. I'm an educator, certainly by training, but I also like to do. So when you say, I'm a professor at St. Bonaventure, but I also work for our county health department, I'm able to then do what I teach, which is fantastic. And it keeps me current with what's going on. But what got me started thinking about the infodemic, which is the pandemic of disinformation, is COVID. I mean, if we can go back in time a few years to COVID, I was really bothered because I have the background in science and healthcare. And it really bothered me that a lot of folks didn't seem to have an understanding of what exactly was going on and didn't have an understanding of health, didn't have an understanding of science or the scientific method or vaccines and some of the precautions that we should be taking. So the World Health Organization actually at that time recognized that as well. And they developed an infodemiology or an infodemic manager's training program. And on a lark, I applied. I didn't think I'd get accepted, but I did, which was fantastic and really rather changed the trajectory of, what I'm doing and, connecting with people all over the world, dealing with the same problems of disinformation. Maybe it's different pieces of information, but it's still the same sort of tactics and things, really drove me to want to improve people's literacy in a number of areas, because we're seeing disinformation everywhere. It's not just in health and science, although that's my background. We see it in politics. Clearly, we see it in politics. We see it in a number of areas. Media literacy is, something else that's near and dear to my heart too. And too many people lack those skills to recognize what's true and what's not. And I think that, that's sort of where I came up with, I want to write this book. It's not an academic book. Academics often are speaking to each other, which is great, but I wanted to be able to distill information for the lay public. So the book is very much for the layperson. It's not something that's going to have this highbrow academic air to it.
You start out in your book actually referencing the rise of COVID-19 and then the rampant science and media illiteracy that led to chaos and the rise of conspiracy theories and vaccine hesitancy. I noticed that myself, and that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, The Rational View, around the same time. You, as well as many university educated folk, even myself, assumed that people were just stupid and needed to be educated. And you admit in your book, in an admirable insight, that such a conclusion was you being fooled by disinformation. What do you mean there, that you were fooled to assume that people were just not media literate and not, not understanding?
That's one of the things that I do say to folks. It's so very easy to assume someone is just dumb and they just don't know. That doesn't get at what the heart of the problem may be. No one likes to be called stupid. So if you're trying to persuade somebody or change somebody's mind or present information to them, and you start with the premise that you're an idiot, no one's paying attention to you after that. And the truth is, most people are not. There are a lot of reasons people believe, and I go into that in the book as well, a lot of reasons people believe disinformation. And yes, I am absolutely guilty. And there are days when I will look at people and say, in my head, I try not to vocalize it, but I'll say, or I'll think, wow, you're really dumb. But then I have to check myself, because just because you don't know what I know doesn't make you stupid. I probably, Al, don't know all of the things you know. Doesn't make me stupid. So when we think about the reasons that people may be believing disinformation, we have to keep those things in mind. We don't have to agree with why they believe, but understanding why they believe is going to be really helpful in trying to craft any messaging. So, for example, where I am in New York State, we're not far from, I'm actually in a very Republican part of New York State. I mean, New York is generally a Democratic state, but I'm in a Republican part of the state. So we have a lot of folks who very much feel as though they've been ignored, they've been lied to in the past, and so they're going to believe someone that they're going to be trusting, and that person could be giving them disinformation, and many times is. And we also have a population of Native Americans up the road who have a really, really good reason not to trust what we might be saying. Same thing we have an Amish population. We have a Black population. That these are folks who have really good reasons for not believing and not trusting. Also, if people don't really understand, and in the case of COVID, people didn't understand the health and the science behind it, they want an easy answer. So whoever is giving them the easiest answer is who they're going to listen to. They don't want to hear the highbrow scientist, spouting all these polysyllabic words that no one has any understanding of. They want to hear something that they can relate to, that deals with their daily life, something that they can understand. And, that's where our challenge is. How do we communicate information that needs to be communicated in a way that everybody's going to understand that? But then at the same time, as an educator, it's very much, how do I teach my students how to think critically, how to look at information and determine, is it true or not? How to then craft that messaging, because generally speaking, communication students don't want to deal with math and science. So it's, they want the easy answer too. So that's, sort of where I get the idea that, okay, yeah, sometimes I have to step back and check my own ego and check my own privilege, if you will, and make sure that I'm not ignoring folks and not, kind of dismissing their reasons for believing or acting in certain ways.
That's a very good realization, I think. And, the other people aren't stupid. That, this is, half the country almost. in these polarized issues, are very skeptical of any claims from authority, and with good reason, as you say. You point out that the scientific method, teaches you to flip flop, quote unquote, in response to new data. And most people who aren't scientists interpret this as scientists being untrustworthy or lying. But it's very far from the truth. This is just updating our beliefs in response to new evidence. What advice would you give to scientists when communicating to the public in such situations where new science is coming out and opinions are being updated on the fly?
Ideally, you don't have to do that until you've got most of the information that you need. I mean, I think the problem with COVID is that we saw the scientific method in action as COVID was happening. And therefore, people saw all of the behind the scenes questions that scientists are asking and information they get. And then, oh, wait, we've got new information. I think maybe the best thing we can do is really teach people what exactly that means, and maybe even using an example that they're going to understand in a better way than than a scientist. And I think in my book I use, and it's probably not the best example, but I'm like, okay, when you're choosing a restaurant, you're kind of in your head in a weird way going through that sort of method, right? Like maybe you're looking at reviews, you're asking your friends for their opinions, you're taking a look at a price point, what sort of food, so you're kind of doing this in your daily life. And I don't think people recognize that. So I think if they realize that they're probably doing their own research and probably kind of following those same methods in their daily life, I think that might be a better way to do it rather than try to explain some pretty complex scientific ideas to them. That could be one way to do it. I'd love it if everybody understood science and if we could teach everybody science, but I mean, I'm not that optimistic.
Yeah, I think the media portrayal of science in the movies and TV shows is of certainty and a list of truths. You go to the scientists, they tell you the truth, they tell you the answers. They never are uncertain in the movies. I don't think it's a realistic portrayal, and so it's really doing disservice to science, to the way the media they're portrayed in the media. It feels good to be looked upon as a truth teller as a reference, but that's not what science is. Science is it's a method to approach truth kind of asymptotically.
Right. And I think sometimes scientists don't do themselves their own favor either, because I think that, when you reach a certain level within your field or your career, and you and I are probably both guilty of this as well, you have this level of knowledge and you don't recognize that other people don't necessarily have that same level of knowledge. And you also have this ego about you that makes it difficult, I think, sometimes to explain things. I was actually following, there's an epidemiologist that I follow, and she had said, one of the things that really was encouraging for her is she reached out to someone in public relations who did some training with her to help her understand essentially how to translate her sort of high level science knowledge to the lay person. And I think we could also be doing, more of those sorts of things as well. I actually have a colleague in our biology department who did that. She had her students work on a research project, and she had me come over and listen to them and try to explain it to a layperson and then provide them critiques. And most of them did really well, but there was one guy I felt so bad. I'm like, you know what? You're just not the person we're going to put in front of the media. Like you're the one who's going to talk to someone else, because everybody's not going to get that, and that's fine. But yeah, I think we could also be doing a bit more of that. We also need to stop with the narrative that if some information changes, that you shouldn't also then change your way of looking at things. And that's where I say, we call it the flip-flopping. And flip-flopping is so often, particularly in politics, seen as this bad thing. Well, if I get new and better information, well, I hope I then change the way I approach things or the way I do things. It would be really foolish if I find out that, I hope this never happens, that, I can't have a glass of red wine at night. But if I find out that that's, the worst thing, okay, maybe I should change behaviors. That's probably a bad example. But anyway, yeah, you should be changing things as they go along. But I think that people lacking an understanding of exactly how science works. They do think that, okay, this study came out, therefore this is the last time we'll talk about this. There's not going to be any more research. Well, no, we're continuing to do research. We're continuing to learn more as we understand things in a better way.
Mhm.
Science hasn't explained everything yet.
We're a ways away yet.
Yep.
Not everything is solved. And I think also skepticism gets a bad rap in popular culture. The skeptics are the bad people on the X-Files. You got to believe it's out there. And
Right.
The power of belief is much more valued in society over the power of skepticism and show me the facts. And that's an uphill battle, I think.
We also have to be careful with that too, because we ridicule some skepticism, right? Like if someone comes in and they're telling you about a conspiracy theory as an example, we then want to, oh, please, that's ridiculous. You're foolish, or, whatever we may say. But if they're asking questions, let them ask questions. I really would hope more people would be skeptical and would ask questions. But I think it's important to also recognize I know what I know, but more importantly, I know what I don't know. So I think that's something that's really key as well. And if you approach things as if you know everything, none of us knows everything. Not even Google, right? Or AI. I mean, none of us knows everything. So, but what you don't know is probably most dangerous. Like you have to understand that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very hard to admit that you're wrong once you come out in public and advocate for something. It becomes part of your identity, and to I'm a good person because I'm doing the right thing on this issue, and then you realize that you're not doing the right thing on that issue. Your mind kind of shuts down and tells you to stop.
But at the same time, I'm glad you raised that. Admitting that you're wrong is so incredible in helping to develop trust too. Now, you can't be wrong all the time, because then no one's ever going to listen to you and trust you. But if you recognize that you're wrong, because we all are, we're all of us, none of us, again, is going to be right all the time. And is not, we're all going to make mistakes. But when you admit that you're wrong and then own that and correct it, people are going to be more apt to trust you and believe you, because they know you're authentic and you're being real.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's a couple things that I might want to touch on. You mentioned briefly that what an infodemic is. Could you just maybe describe that again? Like go over what is an infodemic? And you're an infodemician.
Infodemiologist. It's so funny because I think I may have coined infodemiologist. I'm not sure, but the infodemic is the pandemic of disinformation. So it's essentially an epidemic of disinformation, propaganda, whatever you want to call it. And you can define disinformation and even break it up. So there's disinformation, there's misinformation, and then there's malinformation. So the main difference is and it could be the same information, but it's intent. So disinformation is essentially I'm creating something with some ill intent, or I'm doing it because I want to profit. I'm getting something politically, whatever the motivation is, I'm creating something I know to be untrue and I'm sharing it. You might get that information from me and you trust me, maybe because I have a PhD or you've talked to me. So you think, well, Pauline knows what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably true. You share it with your followers. That's misinformation, same information. Now, malinformation is still disinformation, but it's really malicious. So when you think of something like revenge porn, that would be malinformation. Like you're doing something to really be hurtful to somebody. You're sharing information that maybe is incredibly private. You're doxing them. You're, like I said, maybe sharing photos or videos that real or doctored, that are going to be detrimental to somebody's confidence or somebody's reputation.
Yeah, that's a lot of these AI videos now are coming out of politicians doing whatever, and you can't tell the difference between that and reality. You just have to go and check other news sources to see, is this actually something that happened. It's very easy to go along with it if it confirms your prior biases.
Absolutely. And that's problematic as well. We're looking for information that's going to reinforce our own beliefs. And, if especially now with as polarized as things can be, we're looking for information that maybe makes the other side look really bad so that we can kind of sit back like, see, we told you, or we can laugh about it. And I mean, I can't lie. Some of the memes and the videos are keeping me sane because they're really funny, because I recognize that they're satire. Not everybody does, though. So don't take them away from me, because otherwise I don't know what would happen. But I think that we have to understand the role that they're playing for sure.
Mm-hmm. So your book claims to be a guide to truth. So what's the TLDR? How does one find truth in the midst of an infodemic?
Well, education first and foremost. I mean, we need to understand, like I said, you need to know what you know, but also know what you don't know. And then think about where you're getting the information. Is the information coming from a more reliable source? Is it coming from an academic journal? Is it coming from a reputable news source? And here's where things get tricky, though, too, because now you can argue, well, what's a reputable news source? I tend to read, there are certain places that I go to read or to watch news, and then someone on the other side of the political spectrum might argue their news source is the source to go to. So it's becoming trickier. There's no question about it. It's harder to find the truth. So, who's the source? When was something published or written? Is it more recent? Is it not? So in the case of COVID, I would even argue if I looked at a research paper from 2021, that would even be outdated. And it's only 2025 right now. Certainly, there are some seminal studies, not necessarily related to COVID, that, we refer to as academics over and over, that seem to stand the test of time. But also, who's writing it? Do they have any kind of a conflict of interest? And, you can find so much on the internet right now that will give you that information. But you really do have to do your due diligence, or find those sources that are going to help you do that. I tell people I pretty much fact check everything now, even something I pretty well 100%, 99.9% know to be not true. I'm still going to dig it up and see if I can't find, is there something else, or did I miss something?
So how do you fact check? How does someone who has not got a PhD fact check scientific information, for example, in a disinformation rich area?
Honestly, the first thing I usually tell people to do, is just Google something. That's usually where I start, and then kind of dig from there. So if I Googled, whatever your question might be, so I can actually give you an example that has another example. I have one of my nieces lives in Salt Lake City, and we are from just outside of Buffalo, so we're huge Buffalo Bills fans. And if you follow football, people in Buffalo are really rabid fans of the Bills. And we also don't care for Kansas City. There's this huge rivalry. So,
okay.
So during the lead up to the Super Bowl, the Bills played Kansas City, and there was controversy about the refereeing, right? There always is. But this was particularly egregious. And, Buffalo Bills fans were outraged. So a few weeks after the Super Bowl, my niece sends me something. She texts me, because we used to watch the games together, and she says, "Is this true?" And it was essentially, and I'll paraphrase, it was essentially, so-and-so referee is being investigated by the NFL because of bad calls during the Kansas City Bills game, and he's been suspended, this whole shebang. So the first thing I did was I Googled it, found nothing. Then I went to ESPN, because if the NFL is going to be doing something, this outlet's going to cover it. Nothing there at all. Then, as I said, Buffalo fans are rabid. So I went to our Buffalo news outlets, because if this was happening, this would be all over the media. Nowhere. So then I replied to her and I said, "Where did you find this?" Well, she said Facebook. And I thought, well, I should have asked that question first, right? But I thought, I'm giving her a lesson, because you can't take the educator out of this, right? So I said, "This isn't true. I'm not finding it anywhere." And her reply was really telling, because she said, "I really wanted it to be true." And I thought, that still gives me chills, because how often do we see that with folks? I really want this to be true, so maybe I'm not doing that fact checking. So I did all of that to try to see if this is something true. Think about where the information is. Now, Google does have some really great tools that if you have like an image or a video, they have like reverse image search that you can do to find out maybe where that video or where that photo, showed up to begin with, because we're recycling some of these photos and videos to represent, allegedly, I should use air quotes around represent, events that are happening now. So the recent riots, I shouldn't say riots, the recent peaceful protests in LA that are being represented as riots, they're recycling photos from other not peaceful protests to
Wow.
represent this. So, and we've seen this before. We see this in Gaza. We've seen this with COVID, so these aren't things that are new. So you really do have to do your due diligence. Maybe, geez, do you have that person that you trust that, like, she knew to reach out to me? Do you have someone who can do this fact checking for you? But usually, like I said, the first thing I say is just Google it. Do a quick Google search. Something's going to come up or not.
Mm-hmm.
Then go from there. I will often also Google some of the authors and things too. And believe it or not, I actually enjoy some of the conversations you see on like Reddit, because you have some of these folks in here too debating it, and you can kind of see some of the back and forth. It's not easy though, and I don't expect people to go and do all of the things that I do to fact check. I'd love it if they did, but that's not an expectation. This is sort of my job, right? I mean, I feel like I have to, but it's interesting to me when I see things like that. But I raised that issue because when she came back to me and said, I really wanted it to be true, that really struck a chord.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of folks might be thinking, God, I really hope that's true.
Yeah.
Not always.
The idea of Googling other news sources is important, I think. It's definitely the same thing that I would do. But I think there's a group of people that have been told that all of the news is lying to you. Mm-hmm. And, there's been a campaign to devalue journalism in general and say, oh, they're all lying. All the mainstream media is telling you the truth. Only listen to our media source. Mm-hmm. And people get siloed. They listen to media that gives them answers that they like because it doesn't challenge their predispositions. So, I'm worried that people, when they go out and challenge, look at media, they're going to look at Joe Rogan and Fox News and say, look, I've looked at two different medias and they're both saying the same thing. I think we have to encourage people to look outside of their sphere of influence. And that's a challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And the sad reality is we're not going to get everybody, and I say to folks, if people are really that siloed, there's probably not much you're going to do to bring them over. And, when you reference, Joe Rogan and Fox News, folks on the left are doing the same thing with certain outlets. And I could argue, one side is a bit more truthful than the other. But even on the left, I take a look. I mean, I was just really incensed recently, too, with some of the clickbait headlines that I've seen in what I would consider to be rather reputable news outlets. That if all you're doing is reading the headline and you don't then read the story, you're going to think that that's the reality. And two recent ones come to mind. Our Supreme Court just essentially said that some of the federal judges can't make blanket injunctions that impact the entire U.S. And the headline essentially read, Supreme Court is essentially okay with, eliminating birthright citizenship. And I'm like, well, no, that's not at all. That's not at all what they said. But if that's the headline you saw, you're going to be up in arms. And the other more recent health-related one is related to fluoride. Like, I think one of the headlines was, fluoride will lower IQ in kids. And I'm like, no, okay, it was a recent study. Well, I actually went and looked at the study. Again, most people aren't doing that, but I went and looked at the study. I'm like, that's not at all what this study is telling us. This is, it's saying it's lowering an IQ by like 1 or 2 points. That does not an idiot make. I mean, that's not going to be impactful. None of the studies in that meta-analysis were from the US. And you're talking about places that have higher natural, I mean, it was just crazy. But if all you're reading is that, and because of that, you've now got state Utah just outlawed fluoride in its public water system. It's interesting though, because I think I saw that Calgary is now putting it back. They had taken fluoride out of their water and now they're putting it back. Buffalo in the same situation. So, some of these things really do have impact. This disinformation.
Yeah, I've heard of some of those. Yeah, very sure. Like Rochester also took out fluoride
and that has some really detrimental health impacts, especially on kids.
Well, I don't think they even announced it, but people notice the cavity rates going up.
Well, I think
Tooth
in
decay.
Buffalo, I think they have like the American Dental Association and some of the other the dentists are actually suing the city because of what's happened with the kids because they've,
Hmm.
been able to, correlate that. So,
Hmm. Interesting. You mentioned in your bio that you had done some work on public health on lead poisoning as it impacts public health. Could you tell us a little bit about what that was?
absolutely. It's really interesting with lead because when I got the fellowship with the Rockefeller Foundation, I wanted to just write generally about disinformation, and they wanted me to narrow it. So I'd been working with our county health department on some lead poisoning and prevention of lead poisoning, essentially with kids. And I will admit my ignorance here too. I just thought, well, don't have your kids suck on the windowsill, and that's the problem is solved, right? Because that's the only place lead is. Heck no. I had no idea how pervasive lead still is in our environment. And
Hmm.
so putting this policy piece, so you certainly you can get lead in your paint chips. It can also just be in dust. You can have lead in your soil. If you're a hunter, you might still be using lead buckshot. Um, some toys and like crayons and things coming from other countries might contain lead because they don't
Hmm.
have the same rules we do. We've just had some recalls because some countries will put lead in cinnamon to make it a little bit heavier so they can charge so they can get more bang for their buck,
Oh my
if you will.
gosh.
And apparently lead is a bit sweet tasting. I mean, I don't recall that. So we've got these issues
Yeah.
where you don't see lead. And so we want to try and obviously prevent particularly kids because they're going to be the most impacted. And the disinformation around that, I was really startled to hear some of the things that people were saying in terms of disinformation. I mean, I thought
Okay.
I was a little bit ignorant because I didn't recognize exactly where lead was. But when you have landlords who don't want to perform lead abatement in their homes because it's incredibly costly, and they're renting their home, they will tell their tenants that if you report me, Child Protective Services is going to come and take your children. So shut up, right? And I thought, what the who's it's just one of those that it still gives me chills to think that people can be so cruel to one another because you
Hmm.
don't have the money or you don't want to take care of this. And for many of these folks who are renting, they don't have anywhere else to go, so they just then do shut up and their kids
Hmm.
may suffer. So these are some of the things that we discovered with looking at the disinformation related to lead. And we've since gotten some grants, particularly with our local health department, to try to help educate folks, to train some of the contractors so they can go into the homes and help to abate the lead, and then help families too and provide money so that folks have funds so that they don't have to come up with all of this themselves. And certainly we're also seeing lead still in our water lines, so that's something particularly in the US we're trying to replace the water lines. We saw that in Flint, Michigan. We saw it in Mississippi. So yeah,
Hmm.
I guess when I first looked at it, I didn't realize it was still such a large problem.
Yeah, I remember it being a
Yeah,
big issue with leaded and unleaded gasoline, and
right,
just being emitted everywhere for very little good reasons.
right, right.
That
And
was
so then
that's
you
a
think
huge
it's
thing.
gone, right? You're like, wow, we
Yeah.
got rid of
Oh,
lead and
it's
gasoline. So
done.
what's the issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What one issue that comes up quite a bit and it's very polarizing, associated with misinformation and disinformation, is the question of what to do about it on social media. Censorship of misinformation versus free speech. How do you fall on this issue, and what's your suggestion?
My suggestion is probably not the most popular one. I am not a fan of so-called censorship for several reasons. First of all, I think people should be able to say what they like. Now, with some caveats. I mean, obviously, if you're threatening someone's life or saying something that could be incredibly harmful, which you could argue disinformation is. The problem I have with it is then you've given the folks who are maybe being censored or who are being fact checked, if you will, ammunition that they can then use against you. So here I am saying, you know what, Al, what you said is wrong. That is not correct at all. You say, well, what gives you the authority? or you're just being paid by, the left or the right, or, you have
Mm-hmm.
big pharma in your pocket. I mean, so you have any number of things that you can say that I might be doing this. I think the best answer, and this isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, and that's why I think people are, shy away from it a bit, is truly education. We need to really teach literacy and critical thinking in a better way than we do. And dismantling education as is happening in the States right now is not going to be helping us at all. But I'm not necessarily a fan of having some sort of nebulous group that is fact checking. Now, if you want to do that yourself, like if I go online, and I don't tend to engage generally with people if they've gone over some weird cliff, but if I want to post, I see someone who's posted something and I want to say, actually, that's not quite true. And here's some information, and maybe take a look at this site or what have you. As long as you're doing it in a way that's not like, God, you're stupid, how can you believe that? And, so you want to make sure that you're at least being reasonable. And I've seen that actually with the health department Facebook group. Folks sometimes will post things, and then we go on in a very measured way and just say, well, certainly we understand that some people believe that might be the case. However, this is what's actually happening. And if you need more information, here's some places to get it, and please call us, or, whatever the case may be. So I'm not necessarily a fan of some of the fact checking that you may see, because it just gives ammunition where you don't need more fuel in the fire. You don't.
Yeah, I think your point about danger is the difficult line to draw. We saw this in COVID. Lives were at risk, and there's been huge blowback on the vaccine denial, or whatever you call it, vaccine effectiveness. There's a huge community now because they don't understand how vaccines work potentially, or I'm not sure exactly how this came to be such a major thing, but lives are being lost now. And I'm on side with, I'm against censorship. I think we should be dragging these things out and countering them in the open, and not giving them information. But there's definitely a significant fraction of people that just don't have the energy, and just censor it all. And I don't know how we decide whether this is life or death, right? Because children are dying from measles again.
Well, and I think some of it too, particularly from a public health perspective, is we're a victim of our own success. Most of us have never seen measles. Most of us have never seen smallpox. We've never seen polio. We've never seen these diseases that have been eradicated because of vaccines. So we don't think it's a problem. So if we don't see it, why should I get a vaccine? Because I'm questioning the vaccine, because I don't really understand how they work. And I saw someone who I trust who's talking about how we shouldn't have vaccines. And I mean, particularly in the US now, when you've got RFK Jr., who's been anti-vax for years, who's now in charge of this, people are going to be looking to him, trusting him, because he's in a position that you should be able to do that.
You would think.
Well, yes. But I do think some of it is, we're a victim of our own success. We have a gentleman who works in our health department who had polio when he was younger, and he had relatively mild case. He walks with a limp, and he has a cane that he uses. And when folks were against the COVID vaccine, he was so vocal about how important vaccines are. And I think a message coming from someone like that is critical too, because he's lived it and you can see it. It's something that's visible, right? It's not something that you can say, well, geez, I had measles, and, but there's no visibility of it. And he was really helpful in getting folks to get the vaccine, because he said, look, I could be dead. I mean, he's playing it like this.
Right.
And not untrue. I mean, obviously don't ever lie to people, because that's just not going to help you out. But, things like that are helpful. During COVID too, I was so happy when you had some of these opinion leaders, like I'm old enough to think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is really fantastic. But then you also have like LeBron James, who are speaking to the Black community saying, please get the vaccine, because they were distrustful. And again, rightly so. They have a lot of cultural trauma that would prevent them from, trusting white folks with giving them information. So I do think that in many cases we are a victim of our own success, and people don't recognize what that alternative is. And again, too, yes, we're seeing measles death, but I'm not actually seeing that. Like, it's not my neighbor, it's not
Mhm.
someone in my community. So Texas, and I'm forgetting where in Canada. I think I saw there was an outbreak in Canada too, but I don't see that. That's not something that I can see every day. So I'm not
Mm.
thinking about that because I'm more worried about how much eggs cost, or I'm more worried about, whatever else in my worldview here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the hard part is making rational decisions on these large public policy issues when people don't make rational decisions. They make emotional decisions. And that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, was to try to help guide those discussions and bring these issues to the forefront. We should be making effective public policy decisions, not knee-jerk public policy decisions that don't do anything.
Yes, kindred spirits as well. I think we probably started our crusade at about the same time. Like, come
Mm-hmm.
on, we're doing this because we want people to live really well. We want people to have good life. We want people to have the right information. We want you to make decisions based on accurate information. I have a great T-shirt I often wear. It says, "Your anecdote is not evidence," and I'm like, "Amen." Except, and I do say this, sometimes if you're communicating something to someone, you need an anecdote. But your anecdote can't be well, my uncle smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day and lived to 90, so cigarettes don't have an impact. It has to be based on some kind of fact. So I could give an anecdote about, the vaccines that would be based on, so it's like, well, Susie next door said blah, 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 but based on, some evidence. So often people need it to be something that they can very easily relate to. Because, like I said, again, what's happening in Texas, it's far enough away from me that maybe I don't need to worry about it. But we do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So your podcast is called Data Doyen?
Well, yes, but I'm resurrecting the podcast, so it's going to be WTF What the Fact. So to mirror
Awesome.
my LinkedIn newsletter. Yes. And I write that too. I try to be as middle and nonpartisan as possible, as difficult as that can be sometimes,
It's very
because I
difficult.
don't want to alienate people. And I do want people to, get the right information. I also tend to not write things from a knee-jerk perspective, because I think there's a little bit too much rush to judgment with things as well. So I'm not a fan of, you must be first with the story. You need to be right. Accuracy is more important than being the first one to tell the story, because it's your reputation. I want people to know they can trust me.
Right.
And if I just come out with information as quickly as possible, or I just spout things without making sure I've done my due diligence, that doesn't solve any problems either. So
yeah, it's very difficult, because it's, even as a scientist, it's hard to keep up with everything in every field, right? And there's so many things that are, as you say, it's an infodemic. There's information coming at people from all areas, and without a friendly scientist to help you out, it's very difficult to find your way through all of it. So it's I can understand people being despairing of any media, right? They just follow our leaders, and that unfortunately doesn't lead to good places in every case.
yeah. And anyone can be a journalist now, right? And I should use air quotes around journalists. Like, anyone can go out and start a podcast, can start a newsletter, can start a blog, whatever it is. And
Joe Rogan.
yeah, exactly. And I do joke with some folks. I say, if you say something with enough confidence, people will believe you, whether it's true or not. And so, yeah, you do have to be. I mean, maybe it sucks that I have ethics, but I prefer to think that it's not a bad thing. But I'm like,
It's
no,
not going to
I'm
help
not
your
going to.
your reviews.
I know, right? I'm not going to get more followers because of it. I need to be less ethical so that I get more traction. But no, that's not. I can't do
it
that.
seems like the most popular stuff is the extremes, right? The extremes that play on your fears, that play to your biases. It's it's frustrating.
We fearmonger so much. Like there's so much fear mongering because people don't want to be in a state of fear. And what do we do then? We point the finger because we need a scapegoat also, right? So we point the finger at pick a group and, then we vilify them. So during COVID, it was folks from China, right? Because it was the Chinese unleashed this virus on everybody. And now, in our country, it's like any immigrant who's brown, essentially. I mean, because we must get rid of all of these folks. It's very, or anyone who says anything against Israel is clearly anti-Semitic, which is not true at all. So I feel like we also go to the extremes instead of saying, let's have rational conversations. It's if I say, I think that what Benjamin Netanyahu's doing is terrible. Doesn't make me anti-Semitic. I'm just taking a look at what's happening. And I can also say Hamas is a terrorist group. I mean, you can sort of moderate.
They can both be true.
Right, exactly.
There are no good people in this conversation, in this situation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But if you go to the extremes, and I see that too often, then that doesn't help either. And the shouting, the shouting at each other, the name calling, and this lack of civility. We actually, and that scares me, I think, quite a bit as well, because we have a program here in the States. It's Congress to Campus. And so you will have retired folks or folks who are no longer in our Congress will come to your campus, one Republican and one Democrat, and they, talk to students and have open forums and so on. And we were at a dinner once, and some of the students were there, this poor young freshman. So what are you, 18, 17 years old? And these Congress folks were talking about how, boy, there's no civility anymore. And there's such a, remember when people used to, if you disagreed, it was fine and so on. And this poor young kid says, I never knew it was civil. And I thought, oh gosh, for 17, 18 years, all he's ever seen is people yelling at each other and calling names. And that's not what I want us to be. That's not where I want us to go. But I don't know how you turn that around necessarily. That scares me, that they think this is the norm. And if you want to be in politics or if you want to be a leader and have any kind of power, this is what you have to do. This is what you should aspire to. And that is not a message I want out there, but it's there.
Yeah, wow. That's true. Believing what some 17-year-old, 19-year-old has seen. Yeah. It's frightening. There were better times.
Did I just make you speechless? It's scary. And I think about, and it's so interesting too, because I will talk to students. I'm in my 50s, so I'm a bit more seasoned than they are, obviously. And I'll ask them, what are your concerns? And it's so interesting to me what bothers them and what they're worried about, because it's not what I'm worried about, generally speaking. And I'm like, okay, well, let me see if I can't craft some things in class to address those things that you have issues with, because, excuse me, in my head, I'm crafting my issues, but it's just really, It's fascinating what, excuse me, what the differences are, in terms of what we find concerning.
Is there any particular thing that strikes you as a big dichotomy between what you're worried about and what a younger generation is worried about?
Down here in they're really worried about student loan debt. And I'm well past I've passed that to a point. They're also incredibly worried about AI taking their jobs in a way that I don't know that I necessarily thought about. And I actually was at a conference a year or so ago when they were talking about AI, and one of the gentlemen there, who's a CEO of one of the healthcare organizations down here, said, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI. So we should be, as faculty members, teaching our students how to use it instead of saying, no, it's cheating, don't use AI. So I've been trying to incorporate AI into my classes a bit more. And I teach communication, so the students are already in their internships using it to write social media posts or to write press releases or whatever they might be doing. So that was a concern they had. I expected, I guess, that they'd be concerned about like the environment and things, but it was really the student loan debt. And then,
economics is definitely on everyone's mind, and owning a house
Because it
or
turns out they
not.
don't want to live with their parents forever. I guess I just assumed they did.
It just seems that way.
I know, right?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's definitely a valid concern of the younger generation. And appreciate your perspective on all of this stuff. So what's next on WTF? What are you working on for the podcast?
I'm actually looking at more of the witch hunts. I'm working on my next book, and I'm going to focus it on the witch hunts, a little bit of historic witch hunts, but also what we're doing now with witch hunts. So essentially
Okay, very
the
interesting.
othering of folks, right? So I'll talk about some of the historic, you know, like the McCarthyism in the 50s and so on, and
Hmm.
some of the ways that we kind of combat that. But then I look at history and I think everything is so very cyclic, right? Like I feel like we're repeating these things instead of learning from them. But right now we're seeing, like I said, here in the States, we're othering anyone who doesn't look like the white folks, right? So
Sure.
vilifying them. I mean, of course, the Haitians were eating our cats and dogs. I mean, all of these different things that we're doing to get people to be fearful and to want to tell on their neighbors and round people up. I mean, so I'm going to focus more on the witch hunts and how we shouldn't be vilifying folks. And isn't it wonderful? I mean, we're a country, both of us, we're countries of immigrants. We're countries of people who've
Hmm.
come from other places, and every new group that's come in, we seem to vilify. I mean, when the Irish first came to this country, right? Boy, they were dirty, filthy. Pick some stereotype. When the Italians got here, and that, so on and so on. So,
Yeah.
and now, thank goodness, we have Irish culture, and thank goodness we have Italian culture. And I think that we need to be more embracing of that. And I think we
Hmm.
also see some of the attacks on religious groups that are different from Christianity that we could also say is sort of the witch hunt. But then also some of the rhetoric around what people are calling a witch hunt, that so anytime you don't agree with me, oh, it's a witch hunt. Well, no, that's not. I mean, we use different language here. So that's what's next. But then I have a
Ah,
colleague who also wants to just play with conspiracy theories, because I mean they can be fun, but I don't want to necessarily focus on that. A lot of people are focusing on conspiracies. I'll let them have that platform.
excellent. Well, good luck on reintroducing WTF. What the facts?
What the facts? Thank you.
That's good. And I appreciate you spending your time to come and chat with us about your new book. Love it. Hopefully, we can all find the truth in this infodemic that we're embroiled in. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.